everybody. This is Craig of the Pacific War Channel. I'm joined here by my co-host Gareth. How are you?
Hey Greg, wonderful to be back here. And well, finally, the series is reaching its conclusion.
We're going to be wrapping up the 7 Years' War series, and of course, we're joined here by our guest Simone. How are you?
Hello, thank you for inviting me for this entire series. I'm really excited and I learned quite a lot as well. So, yeah, let's do one last awesome episode.
To finish her all off. Before we jump into it, I just want to remind everybody, if you've not already done so, please join us on YouTube, or you can check us out on Spotify for the videos. We provide portraits of the figures, maps, to help you Americans with geography when it comes to Europe, especially, I imagine. And it's more of a visual experience. And of course, if you'd like to further support the channel, you can consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, and there's about 35 episodes now and ongoing. The latest episode actually looks at the history of alliance systems that led to World War I. Actually goes all the way back to the 1600s, so it's a pretty extensive episode. It's kind of like a history of Europe in a lot of ways. And you also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for subjects I will tackle next. Stating all of that, well, guys, please jump right into it, and let's see how long it'll take us to wrap this one up.
Yeah, I hope we wrap it up because we do have like a new theater also opening. Spoiler alert, not that big, but yeah, we definitely need to give it spare consideration. I'm just gonna bring up the map, and please excuse me that I have unfortunately way too many tabs, but managed to find it quickly. All right, so we are back in Europe. We've concluded the Americas and the India theater with the British in complete dominance there. Now, back in Europe, the year 1758 for Frederick was pretty. 758-59 for Frederick the Great was really bad. So the man had suffered disastrous defeats in several battles. You had, the battles at the biggest one was probably the Battle of Kernsdorf, where, as Simon explained, Frederick's overconfidence and severe underestimation of the Russians, given that Western Europe tended to have a very low opinion of the Imperial Russian forces, and several other battles in the build up to that we discussed in episode 2, Hawkridge, etc. It was that battle was where Frederick lost half of his army. Half. Let that number just sink in, right? It's estimated he lost almost up to 20 to 25,000 men against Laudon and Fyodor Saltykov's Russian and Austrian forces. And the impact was that provoked closer cooperation between the Russians and Austrians, moderately, given that they are amazing allies, not like what Britain and Prussia were, at least in this war. And the losses in experienced manpower was devastating for Frederick. He had lost many of his veterans, and as Simon had alluded to, as the war dragged on, the quality of the Prussian infantry, which was the gold standard at the start of the war, deteriorated rapidly, but Frederick was smartly compensating it by his superior artillery. There was also a few other battles that took place which also affected the Prussians, one being the Battle of Maxen, when a Prussian corps was completely ambushed, and this was in Saxony, by the way. This was surprisingly by Field Marshal Daun, and he would it would lead to the surrender and capture of an entire Prussian corps. So that's 14,000 casualties if you include the prisoners that were taken place, and the only saving grace you could say for our great Frederick the Great in that battle was Field Marshal Dawn who was taking the victory, and he did not exploit it as usual. He just retreated to his winter quarters. But I would just like to add to the fact that it was a force of 14,000 Prussians against 32,000 Austrians, and Dawn suffered a fewer than 1,000 casualties. It's a pretty convincing victory, to say the least. And in the aftermath of this, Frederick was livid. Like he was. This is probably, you could say, the most out of control he got at a subordinate in the war, because the general Fink, who was the commander of the Prussian forces that surrendered, he spent the next 2 years in captivity, came back to Prussia, and Frederick had him court-martialed and imprisoned again for 2 more years. Even though a lot of Frederick's loyal generals, like Seydlitz, etc., these guys were really like, he just followed his orders. He did not really do anything too bad. But, well, the king was in a pretty foul mood, to say the least. And we also had the Battle of Landshut, which also took place, and it was a similar outcome, where almost 12,000 Prussian soldiers were killed or captured. And this was led by General Laudon. So, folks, maybe just a very quick reminder: the two primary Austrian commanders are Field Marshal Daun and Field Marshal Laudon, with Field Marshal Daun being a more experienced but very cautious commander. Does not take any aggressive action until he has everything in his favor. And Field Marshal Laudon is the guy who advocates for an aggressive strategy. And this is going to be part of his 1760 campaign. And the Battle of Landshut that I was just describing right now was him opening an causeway into Silesia, try to kind of link up with the Russian forces that are now coming in under the various Russian generals. Because in the aftermath of Koenigsdorf, the preliminary agreement was that the Austrians are going to be supplying the Russian forces with, food, ammunition, etc., which has been the only real weakness of the Russians, you could say. Supplies. They've not suffered any massive defeat of anybody in this war. Simon, is there anything you would just like to add on this?
Yeah, you pretty much said everything important. I mean, the only reason Frederick was able to recover were that right at the end, there were only 2 battles where he managed to actually win and sort of stabilize his position.
I think I'll just also add that in about the Battle of Landshut, the General Falk, who was, I'm sorry, I mispronounced it, Fonqua or such, so please pardon my pronunciation. He commanded very ably because General Laudon attacked, and in a perfect maneuver, he actually managed. Let me just see if I can just bring up. You have an image of it up, because I have so many tabs. But just getting back to that battle, he was completely outnumbered. And one sec. Yep, found an image. Let me just pick it up. So this is probably the best map I have. But if you see the blue rectangles in this image, that are the Austrian forces under General Laudon. And you can see just very small Prussian detachments in the red here that are kind of centered around the village of Landshut. These features represent various fortifications and high grounds. They're out of supplies and everything, and they put up a very gallant defense despite the numbers. And General Fonck himself was wounded very badly during the fight. And during that, another one of his fellow generals offered him his white parade horse to so that he can escape because this guy's bleeding heavily. And General Fonck says, "I will not let my blood, soil the fur of such a magnificent beast." To which his fellow general actually said that the honor and glory that this beast would have would only enhance if it had like the blood of a hero. It's a bit crony, but yeah. But ultimately, they surrendered, another 12,000 losses for the Prussians. But consider this: Dawn, when he attacked against 40,000 Prussians, he lost just under 1,000 men. General Loudon attacked 12,000 Prussians who were better commanded. He lost almost 3,500 men. But at the start of, you could say at the start of the 1760 campaign, Frederick probably has maybe what, 130 or so soldiers that are available for him to, utilize for combat. And 130 is more on the higher end estimates. Some estimates go as far as 110,000 soldiers. These are not veterans. They're really poor in discipline, fighting technique, but his artillery is there. But the probably the biggest factor that's destroying the Prussians is the lack of morale. For practically 2 years, they are just been on the ropes. They are getting their ass whooped. Like, I'm not even going to mince my words. Actually, I come to think of it, I don't think I can even recall any victory that the Prussians had for quite a while. At least in the forces in Saxony, East Prussia, etc. Simon, you could just correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, it was a really bad year. And I also can't really think of a battle where they did really well. It was all just disaster after disaster, or tactical mistakes causing issues down the line.
Yeah, I think the only you could say that I don't know if you won't even call it a victory was the Battle of Jorgao, which we briefly discussed. And this was not really something that even Frederick can be proud of because it was 50,000, 48 to 49,000 Prussians, 52,000 Austrians, and Frederick lost about 14,000 men in this attack when he tried to launch a pincer with General Zieten. The Austrians lost slightly more. I would probably use the term a Pyrrhic victory for Torgau, but I guess you could say the only reason he got the victory was uh, Dawn had to leave the field of battle. I remember my uncle from the military, he said, the casualties don't matter, it's just the outcome.
I mean, what you can essentially say that for him, the battle itself was a Pyrrhic victory, but what it meant, what it, at least in the grand strategy of the war or the outcome of the war, the impact it had was massive, because this was pretty much one of the few reasons that he could hold on to everything he had and didn't get further losses of territory.
That is true, but speaking of Frederick's reversals, I want to talk about one battle where he won, and pretty convincingly. I think you definitely would consider that a proper Prussian victory. It's not what do you call? I won't call it a disaster, but just give me a moment to get that particular map up. Why do I have so many tabs? But back to General Loudon when he began his, you could call, I whether you want to call it that reign of terror kind of attack, because he believed in a very aggressive conduct, shock attacks, not long sieges. He preferred to assault fortresses. He had a lot of success, captured key fortifications in Silesia, and what also would happen was the Russians were also coming in. He was getting, and Loudon's 35,000 men were being reinforced by almost 90,000 Austrians that are coming under Generals Lacy and Field Marshal Daun. Now, the Prussians had won a little bit of respite in this battle because prior to this engagement at a fortress, Prince Henry of Prussia, someone will definitely speak about in one of the who commanded the last major battle of this war for the Prussians, he managed to relieve the siege, and then Frederick was also coming in. The problem was, while you have more than 100,000 Austrians closing in, and Frederick has like an army of what, 35,000 at most, the situation for him is that the Russians are also nearby. So you had two entire corps of Russian soldiers that were within a 40-kilometer march of this battle. And that is around 25,000 under General Chesniev, who had marched, and their objective was to link up with Laudon's forces. And then you also have Pyotr Solkov's Russian army as well advancing. I think that is also approximately a corps size. So it's not looking good. So as you can see on this map, one second, let me just try to zoom in a bit more. Frederick has taken position. So he was actually more towards the village of Legnitz over here. But before the battle takes place, on that night, he actually moves to the high ground over here in the night, just repositions his entire army. And just consider this, that General Loudon is in the east. His initial camping before the day of battle was somewhere around here. So he's blocked off the east. Theoretically, you have the Russians to the north. Lacy and Daun's massive army has also arrived, and they are covering the south and west. He's entrapped. The battle, however, does not go the Austrians' ways because in the morning, General Loudon breaks camp, marches north. He crosses the river and is going to move south because the Austrians want to converge and destroy Frederick. But Frederick's redeployment at night, I don't know whether you want to call it like a great strategic decision or just blind luck about this position, but he has chosen it very well. The Austrians have to kind of march through this kind of like narrow passage over here. And after an initial small skirmish, the Austrians of General Loudon are bombarded and wrecked by the Prussian guns. The cavalry and the infantry of Loudon's armies launch devastating attacks. They are pretty effective at trying to get to the Prussian guns, but always get pushed back. And it was also one of the rare occasions when the Anhalt Bernberger's infantry battalions actually fixing bayonets completely repelled a cavalry charge without any cavalry support, which at this point in time was pretty rare for anything because the most effective defense against the cavalry was and breaking it apart was your artillery and a counter cavalry charge. And After suffering from a heavy bombardment, Loudon decides to withdraw his forces because he realized he was facing the full wrath of Frederick's army. He initially believed that this was just a rear guard and Frederick had deployed in the day to actually face off against Lacy and Dawn. So Loudon withdraws, and would anyone like to guess what did the other Austrian armies do?
Well, I pretty much know it because Dawn
Craig,
is Dawn.
Craig, would you like to take the guess of what Field Marshal Dawn and General Lacy did with their massive 80 to 90,000 strong army?
Hesitated.
Yep.
Well,
They actually did not even know that the battle was going on for quite a while. And the biggest, you can call it a what if scenario. Dawn was actually on the field of battle with his forces, close enough, like maybe probably within an hour's or so's march, to start engaging Frederick's flank. And at that point, Loudon was still in the field of battle as well with his forces. So he could have actually pulled off the victory if he actually chose to attack, but unfortunately, as Simon said, Dawn is Dawn. And in terms of losses, the Prussians suffered about 3,400 casualties. Loudon's corps was battered. Of its almost 28,000 men or so, nearly 10,000 were casualties, like killed, wounded, prisoners. And he also lost almost 100 guns. So and because of this, Lacy and Dawn would withdraw from the field of battle completely. So it kind of secured Silesia for now. Breslau did not fall prior to this and would not fall now. And more importantly, the Russian armies that were there in Saxony, they are currently in the territory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, trying to, except for General Chechnyev's corps. And they decide to withdraw as well. So Frederick managed to kind of stave off another inevitable defeat where it probably looked like, the wolves were coming to really take him, but well, another, I don't know whether you want to call it luck or just the blundering of his opponents. I think I know where Simon would probably put his comment.
Well, he had certain skills, but as everybody knows, adrenaline does not always have to have a good strategy. Sometimes opponents are just bad, or sometimes, like every major person in history at some point had to rely on sheer luck to get something done. That is what a lot of people always forget. That
You mean like Caesar's famous luck?
Yeah, or we have every person has every important person in history. They one account of where they nearly died, or any person at any kind at any time could have just gotten sick and died. That is history for you, and which is one of the great things that it distinguishes it from fiction, where everybody has control over it. But sometimes it's just gonna be luck that saves your day.
True, but this would now brings us to the year 1761, and Prussia's situation is pretty dire. Their total manpower and armies now do not exceed 100,000 soldiers across all theaters. So this is considering that Frederick is going to be keeping maybe 30,000 or so with him. Prince Henry, his brother, would be having a similar number. He probably is keeping at least a garrison of 7,000 at Berlin, especially after the Great Cavalry Raid. He has to maintain some forces in the north against the Swedes. And the Eastern Front was a big worry that takes place, because at the end, there is this long siege of Kornberg, which finally ends towards the end of the calendar year 1761. It was practically the third siege of the city, and the Prussian defenses finally gave up. And do you know what was the significance of this, Craig? The Russians now have a Baltic port to ship its supplies. The
Ah,
biggest Achilles heel of the Russian armies in the entire campaign has been removed.
a warm port in the Baltic, I guess.
Yeah,
Be
it's
warm
relatively
water.
a warm water, because from what I at least know of the geography of the Baltics and the ports, the more frozen ports tend to be closer to where the Russians are,
Yeah,
like
St.
on the
Petersburg.
Russian
Yeah, it's a
territory.
close cold port. Yeah, okay.
But this was a major boost for the Russians, and there's also absolutely no risk of Prussia, intercepting the supplies. In the past, they had some moderate amount of luck with various cavalry squadrons in East Prussia and Pomerania, everything just managing to intercept supply wagons and all. But well, unless you're putting maybe a Napoleon Total War cheat code for the Prussians to have your cavalry go onto the water, you're not going to be able to intercept that.
Well, and they couldn't really pull a Sweden anymore and just use the horses across the ice and capture the boats.
And this is but I'm just going to pause on this particular front, because we need to switch over to the Western Front, you could call it, the Hanoverian Front, where the Duke of Brunswick is leading the Hanoverian British and the German troops there, and he the, he has a kind of harsh year, a mixed year, you could say. You have the Battle of Lagnesla, which was a battle between the French under General Marshal Jacques Philippe, and he managed to drive them off. Because Craig, when did we see that the British completely take control of the North American theater? Which year was it? Was it by 1760? Like
Yeah, pretty much.
so, yeah. Because the reason is by 1761, France is hedging all of its bets now against Hanover.
Yeah.
They lost Nouvelle France by now practically, and as you remember, as we discussed, the strategy relied on these guys gaining in different theaters or on the continent to barter away. So if you want to get Nouvelle France back, you got to have something of some significant value. Even though, as you mentioned, right, the
I
trade was still
never.
going down.
Yeah, they never gave a shit.
True, but that's actually why we see the French armies redoubling with an impressive size right now. Now the size of battles on this theater, because so far all the large battles that we've seen have been with either the Prussians against the Austrians or against the Russians. The French have never really sent an army exceeding 40,000 until 1761, when they realized that, oh, well, shit, we really need to get something here. But the first battle was the Battle of Langenzla. I'm sorry, Simon, I don't know if you can pronounce that word.
Well,
Because
I don't have that written down, so
okay,
Lagen
but
salsa.
Langenzalza, sorry. Thank you so much. But that was the first. It was an early battle for the campaigning season, you could also say it, because it was in February. but the French had tried to invade Hanover, and this kind of pushed the French forces back, because that's pretty much what the Duke of Brunswick was very good at, pushing away the French. But unfortunately for the Duke,
Should probably say his full exquisite name. Jacques-Philippe de Choiseul, Duc de Stainville. Oh my god, the old French names are hilarious.
you mean the French master? I wonder if he was actually related to our. Ah, yes. Now I know. I just found out who he was.
He's the older
Greg.
brother of Etienne Francois, Duc de Choiseul.
Yeah, the man who suggested that the greatest way to invade Britain is with unescorted barges across the English Channel, because the Royal Navy has absolutely nothing to do with life.
If he was born just a little bit later, he could have led convoy duties for the Japanese in the Pacific War.
Why? Because warships should be going against warships only.
Exactly.
The Americans should never target supply ships, troop ships, right?
Dishonorable.
It's probably what they thought anyways, but yeah. Anyways, this was the first battle, and it worked out well for the Hanoverian forces, you could call it. Then Duke does try to go to Hesse Castle in Germany to try to capture the capital of Kassel, which is right now being held by the French. However, he does suffer a setback when the Duke de Broglie is able to beat him at the Battle of Grunberg. And this was a pretty big defeat for the Duke. Nothing catastrophic, but he suffered like closer to 10,000 casualties. And the French did not have that many losses, so it did force the Duke of Brunswick to, lift the siege of the city, since he does not have enough forces. And I don't think he believes in overstretching his lines as much as Frederick does. And it is after that battle you actually have the Battle of Villingenhausen. This is fought in July. Again, you have the Duke de Broglie, who is leading the main army. Thanks, Craig. I was literally actually getting that scene battle up. But we had the Duke de Broglie leading, and we actually have an old name returning to this battle, which is the Princess Soubise, who, if I'm not mistaken, was defeated at the Battle of Rock Park by Frederick in 1757. Has been pretty idle for most of the war, probably sulking in Louis XV's court, I guess. And since France never had, at this time, a shortage of great nobles wanted to just go up against the Duke of Brunswick. I digress. And so it's a pretty large scale engagement. We are talking about almost 65,000 Castle, British, Hanoverian, and Prussian soldiers against 90,000 French soldiers. So it is, pretty big. But the French lost for the simplest reason. Their commanders absolutely hated each other. I don't know how many times it keeps happening to the Austrian, French, Russian coalitions. You have commanders who absolutely hate each other.
I mean, that is not exclusive to them. It happens everywhere, every time. In every war, there's like one scenario where two generals just hate each other and lose because of that.
No, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think, Craig, we've always said, right, MacArthur's greatest enemy was the United States Navy.
Absolutely.
IJA, IJN,
Yeah.
Rome, also so many examples. But I guess I'm referring to the working relationships of the commanders in this particular war. For example, Nouvelle France, we saw, right? The
Governor
governor
Vaudreuil
and
and Montcalm.
what Montcalm, yeah. Remembering like just V and M. Sorry, man, I can't recall the names. But you have this. We've seen it with the Austrians, with Don and Charles of Lorraine, for example, in the past. And I'm pretty sure I can bet my life that Loudon hates Don, given their completely different styles. But so here's the problem: the Duke de Broglie is pretty aggressive, and the Prince de Soubise is defensive because he does not know much of military high command. The only real advantage and why he got the job in the first place, better politically connected. But I guess that's typical, right? Not everyone had Prussian academies right now for the officers. And, Prince Ferdinand, who has the respect and love of his generals and soldiers, their main objective was to prevent the French overrunning Hanover and, protect the city of Lippstadt. So, how it goes is, Greg, is it possible you could zoom in a little bit? Because I know the graphics of this particular map are not that great, and yeah. So the Duke of Brunswick, he takes his positions up between the Lippe River and the Arse River, and as you can see on this particular map, there is a lot of foliage, right? You have a lot of forested areas, and while it will probably not be shown on such a map, the area was supposed to be very marshy, boggy, damp, and has ravines. So your means of movement is horribly restricted for the battle for either side. It's whoever is going to adapt to it the most. And so the battle is a several day affair. It takes place over 2 days, the 15th and 16th of July. So on the first day, the Duke de Broglie, who wants to try to win quickly so that he gets his glory, and he's more aggressive and wants to obviously humiliate the Princess Soubise, he attacked early. Now, his initial attack is pretty good. The outposts in the village of Willingdenhausen are, of the Duke of Brunswick are pushed back, but the British commander who commands the left flank, this is the Marquis of Gnarby, his British troops held the high ground behind the village, and by the night, the repeated attacks of the French completely failed, and they retreated. So the Allied lines were not broken. But apparently, I don't think Anakin Skywalker ever saw this idea that holding the high ground works. the The next day, the Duke of Broglie, sorry, he expected the Prince de Soubise to launch a massive assault on the Allied right because he was commanding the left. So the idea was so that he will pin down the Duke of Brunswick's forces there, and the Prince de Soubise, now it's up for speculation whether you want to call it incompetence or spite. He does not even attack. He just makes a demonstration. Now, if your objective is to hold on an entire allied flank, an entire flank of an army, not an allied flank, apologies, you really got to sacrifice your troops or really put in that effort for the diversion to work. And the Duke of Brunswick is like, all right, my right flank is completely safe. So what does he do? He redeploys reinforcements from his reserves, and the right flank defaults to the left, where the Duke of Broglie is planning to make his attack, and they were able to move into the village of Willingenhausen. And at 10 a.m., this on the 16th of July, this column arrives, and the French were caught in this crossfire, and the Duke of Broglie is like, well, shit. My men just surrendered there because an entire brigade just gave up quickly. And he also realizes that the Prince de Soubise is not making any headway. He's not going to attack, so he calls a retreat. And the retreat was not even a good order retreat like what Laudon managed at Liegnitz. It was one half of the French army retreated in one direction, one half retreated in a completely different direction, and both of them blamed each other for everything.
I mean, it would have only been more fitting if they both yelled, "Scatter!" and just ran away.
Yeah. In terms of losses, especially if you consider the size of the forces involved, it really was not that big. The Allied victories, because it was Britain, France, Hanover, they lost about 1,400 casualties. And the French suffered about 5,000 casualties. And overwhelming majority of that from the Duke of Broglie's flank of the army. The fallout was more critical. It's kind of like, I guess, a similar situation where of the Battle of Actium, where the actual battle was not decisive, but the fallout after the battle became more decisive. Back in the French palace at Versailles, the War of Generals exploded, and what happened was that the Prince de Soubise was protected and won that battle just because he was a favorite of King Louis XV's mistress. And the Duke de Broglie was stripped of command and exiled. Yep, that was pretty bad. And this victory did save the city of Lippstadt, and Hanover would be safe for the rest of the season, the campaigning season, and knew that he would also be able to handle larger threats. And it was actually like this battle that also boosted the prestige of the British Redcoats, because they held off that initial first attack by the Duke de Broglie. And otherwise, people really do think of like the British as what, the chums of the Europeans, right? They don't have an army; they just have a navy. So I think that is just kind of like bringing an end to mostly this theater of war, because nothing seriously is going to develop here. But we do have to go to the Iberian theater, because we have two new combatants joining the war, two global powers who had at one point decided that the world actually belongs to them. So we now have Spain and Portugal entering the theater of operations.
Because what could go wrong in entering a war that already is a disaster?
True, but it was called by the Portuguese history, it's called the Fantastic War. And this particular theater of operation was only characterized by guerrilla warfare, partisans of the Portuguese, civilians, heavy illness, sickness losses, and very little battles. And the consideration for the conflict was actually driven by Britain and France. So right now, the Spanish are ruled by the Bourbons as well. France has yet to get into its revolutionary space. So, Louis's head is secure on his neck for now. He was the Louis, not Louis XV in particular, but yeah. And they were able to kind of like, link up and use their family connections. So the King Charles III of Spain and King Louis XV of France signed a treaty. It was called the Family Compact. which is, I guess, pretty fitting name. And Spain was convinced to join not only because of their relatives' pressure, but because of the defeat of France in the Americas. Because now Britain's influence and power in North America is huge, and it's a big threat to the Spanish possessions, especially the Caribbean island, which Craig, I know you alluded to, was like a huge source of income for France for
Oh
many years to
yes,
come.
sugarcane is getting good now.
Yep. Too bad they don't have Coca Cola back then. I would have loved it. But so the consideration that they put was the Royal Navy is now the clear number one navy in the world. It's not going to have that margin of naval dominance that it would have from like the late 1790s till World War II, where it was heads and shoulders well above everybody. It is vulnerable if maybe say like a France or Russia or the Scandinavian nations and Russia, etc., all band up together. So that was one. That's also why France and Spain wanted to team up so that they also have that naval superiority, which is something they do for Trafalgar as well. And they decide to attack Portugal because it is Britain's oldest ally and a major trading partner. And the intention was they hold Portugal for ransom and trade it away for all the lost territories. That was the consideration for why they wanted to invade Portugal. I guess. Do we have anyone who's ever held a country at ransom? I don't know.
There is one story of someone doing that in Central America. It didn't work,
Yeah,
but they tried.
yeah,
They actually
and I'm
took the
pretty sure.
country.
Fair enough. Was it Bolivia?
I don't know which one it was, but there's definitely a story there, as far as I
Fair
can
enough.
remember.
And I'm pretty sure Spain is probably eyeing up Brazil right now because if I think if I'm not mistaken, barring Brazil, all of most of South America is under Spanish influence.
There's a few
So,
French, English, and other colonies, but yeah.
but in early 1762, the the Spanish and French gave an ultimatum to so the British, sorry, the Portuguese, right? And this comes in May. They literally demand to King Joseph of Portugal that terminate your alliance with the British and replace it with a new alliance with us. You close your ports to all British ships and interrupt all commerce with Great Britain, both in Europe and within your empire. You declare war with Great Britain and accept occupation of Portuguese ports, including Lisbon and Porto, by Spanish army, so that Portugal is both protected and liberated from its British aggressors and oppressors. I'm pretty sure, as you can imagine, that did not go down
I
too
mean,
well with the Portuguese.
who could have imagined that explaining to someone that your peaceful intentions by declaring war is not going to work?
Yep. But Portugal was given only 4 days, after which invasion was to take place. And for Portugal, it's actually a bit of a worry. You had the Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755, and it completely destroyed Lisbon, obviously, and it was estimated 40 to 50,000 people in Portugal died from that earthquake and the associated natural disasters. And rebuilding the country and all its infrastructure meant you don't have really money to sustain an army or navy. They've not been able to rebuild their forces. the Brazilian gold that Portugal relied on was pretty much in terminal decline by now. And I think you should hear the size of the Portuguese navy, which at one point was a pretty powerful force. 3 ships of the line and a couple of frigates.
Yikes.
I'm gonna even bet that they're not even going to be like second rates.
That is pretty much Jeff and his boats.
Yeah, I guess. So there are 3 invasions of Portugal that kind of take place by the Spanish, right? So the British at least do, um, you know, send help, but the Portuguese do declare, they refuse the ultimatum, so the war does start. Even though the Franco-Spanish troops have already mustered on their side of the border by March, so they've been there for at least 6 weeks by now, and at their peak, the Spanish are going to be invading Portugal with almost 40,000 soldiers, and the French are sending in about 15,000. The combined British and Portuguese army at its peak was 15,000 as well. that's a disparity. So the first invasion, which takes place between May and June, is the Spanish army, which is led by the Marquis de. Let me just quickly bring up a map. Not been able to find some maps of this game. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't really have like maps that just show much of the invasion routes. Just give me a second. I have to just make do with these. Just bring up. Oh, wait. But yeah, that, as you can see, the highlighted sector, the north, that was the primary theater of operation. I was just literally opening the same images. Greg, do you have the other images also ready? There are 2 more. I have
can
them
put
ready,
them
so
on.
I can take them up.
Okay, you put them on.
All right, sure. As you can see, the first invasion was led by the Marquis of Saria, invaded the northeast, which is called Trasomontes, and their aim was to capture Porto. They they did capture some towns, but the invasion stalls because of the simplest tactic called scorched earth. And the peasants of Portugal were really unhappy with Spanish troops going through their lands. And well, guerrilla warfare was pretty effective. And the Spanish retreat after a few weeks because of starvation and diseases, because I guess they probably expected a steamroller and did not build up their supply base. Who knew, right? Especially when their enemy is burning down its supplies, not that they have much in the first place to begin with. Uh, has the map zoomed in? Because I've
Yep.
zoomed in on the main tab. All right, thanks. So yeah, this is the second invasion, which takes place from July to August, so it's about a few weeks. So the Marquis of Saria is removed from command, and the Count of Ananda leads an even larger force. They do capture the city of Almeida in the region, which was a big success because it was a major fortification against border. And instead of going in and relying on warfare, the Count of Lippe, who was the primary commander of the Portuguese, and he was actually a German, I might add. His full name was Wilhelm He was born Friedrich Wilhelm Ernst Graf zu Schwamberg-Lippe Buckeberg. But he was like a general, or he has been fighting in the war actually. So even though he's the Count of Lippe, he's been Frederick's artillery commander. So man's been involved in quite a lot of battles. Anyways, the Count of Lippe does not choose to engage directly. He uses mountains and terrain to block off the mountain passes and cut the Spanish supplies, which, as anyone knows, is pretty impressive. And that once again would force the Spanish to retreat. And this is also looking at the partisan attacks by the peasants. We're talking about starvation now, and we have a situation where the Spanish and Portuguese are losing like over 6,000-7,000 men. So they do consider and take the third retreat. Now we have our third and final invasion. Which, as you can see, right, they kind of decided to go as the invasion count went up, the geography went to the south. And we have the final invasion where the Spanish moved through the Alentejo region to reach Lisbon directly. So we have this battle of one sec. Sorry, just trying to pronounce it, of Valencia de Alcanatra, where the British, led by Brigadier General John Bourgogne, who would later be pretty famous in the American Revolution, he leads a sudden raid of cavalry into the Spanish lines and destroys a major Spanish base supply depot and captures a Spanish general to add further insult to injury. And then you have the Battle of Villavella, where he strikes again in October, and he defeats Spanish forces that are in the middle of a crossing, and again causes heavy casualties for them. The aftermath is that the Spanish have finally lost their appetite of war and decide to completely withdraw. So by November 1762, the Franco-Spanish are in full retreat. And in terms of casualties for this theater, they lost over 25 to 30,000 soldiers, which, considering they did commit a force of almost 70,000 between the invasions, 77,000. The British and Portuguese, you could call it like their regular forces, never amounted to more than 15K.
This is a pretty upsetting loss.
Yeah. That's putting it mildly. I guess Bourbons are pretty weak. But this was, ultimately, this battle completely destroyed Spanish prestige. One point, the most powerful empire in the world. Like, no one is even close to Spain. And now they just are kind of like a bit of a joke. But yeah, this is just like, the small theater of war that opened up and is over. But now we return back to the Eastern Theater, where, as I mentioned, the Russians stormed and captured the fortress of Kornberg in Pomerania. And Britain is now speculating that Prussia is on the verge of complete and total defeat because the Russians are ready to attack. And Simon, I need you to lead this. We've been waiting for this.
Oh yeah. First of all, now I think the thing you want to talk about, and you also have been very excited to talk about, happens a bit later. I first just want to mention a bit about the year 1761. that is
Okay,
now happening
sure.
after essentially Turgau happens, which is the last battle of the year 1760. And then during almost the entire year of 1761, no major battle happens. The Russians and Austrians at some point even managed to link up to each other and form a combined army. But the Russian general is so hesitant to attack that at some point he just said, "Okay, I'm going home," leaves the combined army and returns to his own territory. Which Loudon,
Did he get like approval?
like, I mean, the funny thing is he matched up with Loudon, and Loudon repeatedly tried to force him to help him in the fight, but he just wouldn't budge, really. Actually,
The Russians generals were pretty bold also because they had their own preferences.
Yeah, they definitely had. Everybody had also their own goals, and well, to be fair, they had the most difficult way to the fight that as we mentioned repeatedly, logistics is really bad for them.
Hey guys, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Please don't forget to check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where you can join the ranks and gain access to a hell of a lot of goodies. At the base minimum, you get access to the exclusive monthly podcast, early access to all of my content, voting rights for what subjects I will tackle next, and at higher tiers, I have much more goodies to come. So please click that link and check it out.
So this
True enough.
essentially happens. There's another small fight where Loudon actually manages to capture one of the key fortresses of Silesia, which is Schweigniz, which is one of the key fortresses to securing Silesia, which he takes in a very short time by a night attack, and absolutely shocks Frederick, who is absolutely distraught once again and thinks he has lost the war. And then the event happens that Gorov already mentioned that completely changes the war, which is that the Tsarina Elizabeth dies. And
To be fair, it wasn't a sudden death. Her health had been on the decline for many years. It was said by this in the midst by the 1750s itself. But yes, on the 5th of January 1762, she passes away. And she and Maria Theresa kind of got along pretty well. And they both disliked Frederick. So kind of united in that displeasure. And that's why you had like pretty good cooperation between, well, pretty good as far as it could get, cooperation between the Russians and the Austrians. And she is succeeded by Peter the Third, and he is pretty influential within Russian circles. The victor of the Battle of Gross Jägersdorf, Field Marshal Apraxkin, he's a big supporter. That's one of the reasons he actually did not even continue his advance back in the early days of the war. Was he got false intelligence that the Tsarina had died and wanted to return to support Peter's claim to the throne. Now, Peter is
well, there is a reason that this changes the war completely, which is that Peter is, well, some people have a passion. Peter is a full-on fanboy, and he's a fanboy for one thing, and that is Prussia. He absolutely loved Prussia. He once stated, there's an actual quote for him where he said he would rather be an officer in the Prussian army than the Emperor of Russia.
I don't know about you. I would rather just have that. But yeah, that's a very famous quote of him. I just probably don't agree with it, but yeah.
And Frederick, of course, seizes this opportunity and just sends so many gifts to Peter. He gives him he sends him uniforms, military honors. He sends him an entire Prussian regiment for him to train. Gives him a prestigious role in the Prussian army.
If I'm not mistaken, Peter also just kind of demanded like one particular medal, right? Which is not even like one of the elite medals, like the highest medals. It's just like a medal of the officers.
Yeah.
Frederick gave, even though Frederick's own diary writings that survived, he really does not have a high opinion of Peter right now. But he is absolutely desperate for anything.
Yeah, and
Frederick's literally tried to get the Ottomans to come in and support him.
He's courting the Ottomans at this point.
Yeah,
he did try to court them.
He actually sent a message.
The Sultan did not even know.
He actually sent a message to his ministers, literally stating that if we do not persuade the Ottomans to attack the Austrians, we are losing this war. Do everything you need to do.
Well, then again, that's kind of the trump card by the Germans. World War I and even World War II, they kind of start courting the Turks. Yeah.
True enough. So I guess this is where the precedent came from.
Yeah,
but Simon, continue.
Yeah, and thanks to all of this, Peter makes peace with the Prussians and essentially reverses all of the gains. He more or less takes nothing in exchange for the Prussians in the future supporting him in taking back the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, which are to the very north and are currently controlled by Denmark in a personal union.
I would just add to this. Peter also, he was a Duke of Holstein-Gottorp as well, so he did have a personal interest in kind of expanding the power of Holstein.
Yeah, so essentially taking back his sort of ancestral homeland of his dynasty.
But the effect for Frederick is enormous. The Russians were about to start the siege of Berlin, and they withdrew. They withdrew from all their conquests completely, and Peter even decided to throw in a nice offer. He offered an entire Russian corps to Frederick.
Yeah, he actually gave him troops to fight the Austrians.
Man, when you have allies like this, who needs enemies? Holy shit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Maria Theresa and her court, especially her chancellor, who was like, along with her, the biggest war hawk in the imperial court at Vienna, were pretty pissed off, to say the least.
I mean, this event in the history books of Prussia and in Frederick's diary, it is referred as the second miracle of the House of Hohenzollern.
I mean, I can see why. Jeez.
And it kind of works, right? Because Peter is kind of like not popular with the nobility because of some other domestic rules he wants to go through. Because that's actually why he was also proposing Schleswig-Holstein's conquest, because it's kind of like a way to boost his prestige. So it's not only just like, it's trying to maybe strengthen his domestic position. So the Russians, or he also passes like 220 laws in his 186 days in the throne.
Yeah, because
and what
we have to point out 286 days of his rule, because who would have guessed that the guy who ended one of the longest and costliest wars of the time by essentially gaining nothing on the cusp of victory, would, well, get deposed.
And his huge German tendencies obviously is not a good look
And
for
he
the
would.
Russian people.
And what's even more insane is that his replacement was his wife, Catherine the Great, which is a born
She and
German.
nobles.
She is born in Germany, and they even preferred her to the Russian emperor.
Well, she became Tsarina.
Yeah.
But yeah, she leads a plot with many nobles and has Peter, executed. And he was kind of forced to abdicate on the 9th of July. And he was transported to Ropsha where he dies. And there is a mystery to the death. Officially, it was a severe hemorrhagical cloic and an apoplectic stroke, while others say he was assassinated. And some say that he was kind of strangled after his midday meal, but managed to escape. And then they strangled him with a scarf because the first attempt with the mattress failed.
What a way to go.
Yeah, and
The most funny thing was actually after his death, 4 people claimed the Russian throne saying they are Peter.
yeah, and there's also one really funny story where actually we have a statement from Frederick the Great, who just says that Peter let himself be dethroned in the same way a child is put to bed.
Oh boy.
But ultimately, Catherine the Great, Catherine succeeds him as Catherine II, known as Catherine the Great. And, the biggest outcome is she's not interested in renewing the war. Even though the Russians have performed very admirably, the reality is they have also suffered heavy losses overall. Their economy is even worse off than Prussia, and it's been stretched to its absolute limit. So she does not want to continue financing this war.
And
this actually also means Sweden leads the war.
well,
So Sweden were like the minor annoyance to Frederick, you could say, throughout the war. But with initially, if Peter helped kind of negotiate a treaty with the Swedes, which caused them to withdraw. So Frederick now just has to focus only on the Austrians for the rest of them. Considering he was fighting on 4 fronts, he'd consider this a really good fortune of luck.
Yeah.
Pretty good turnaround.
Well, to be fair, the Swedes were only there for the opportunity of just taking a few towns in the north.
True enough.
Just Viking stuff.
Ultimately, while he was... So Peter III was buried in a monastery. And when his and Catherine's son, Paul I, becomes the Tsar in the 1790s, he actually is very mad at his mother still for the way she dealt with his father. So he actually does, exhume and rebury Peter's remains in full honors as a Tsar. I mean, just a small side note, but
yeah,
this is literally the biggest turnaround Frederick could get.
Yeah, this would...
Because,
this was pretty much lead into what happens next with 2 really important battles that sort of close the war. And because now Frederick can essentially amass his troops in 2 armies. One that is placed in Saxony, commanded by his brother. And
Prince Henry. Possible king of US.
yeah. And the other army is commanded by Frederick himself, who moves into Silesia to essentially recapture the lost territory and try to defeat the Austrians there, who are moving in there. And Don is essentially trying to, as I mentioned, they managed to capture Seidnitz, which allows them to move further into Silesia. And this is sort of their last attempt at winning the war because the Austrians are absolutely bankrupted. They had to release
I just want to
20,000 troops from the army because they just couldn't pay them anymore.
I guess one advantage of if you suffer more losses in battle, you don't have to pay that much. But I just want to add a little bit, since we are coming to the end of towards the end of 1762. France's morale has also come. France is the last remaining major ally of the Austrian Empire, and they are completely shattered as well. They've taken heavy losses in India in terms of prestige. They've taken heavy losses in North America. The Duke of Brunswick continuously beats the crap out of the French armies. And the British blockades have kind of put a big drain on the French economy because resources are not moving in as quickly. And obviously getting the news of the Russian withdrawal and their failed invasion of Portugal with the heavy losses suffered. It is said that King Louis and his court were convinced that Austria would not be able to reconquer Silesia, which meant they do not want to support them. Because there was a selfish reason for France supporting the Austrians. If the Austrians were to recapture Silesia and incorporate it back into the empire, the French were to get the Austrian Netherlands as their territory. Now, without the ability to, they don't believe they will be able to recapture it, the material support for the Austrians are now also dries up. And as Simon mentioned, the Austrians are pretty much bankrupt. I mean, it's not like Frederick isn't. He is also utterly bankrupt. But Britain is still supplying him, luckily. So he's getting some amount of his supplies and funds taken care of. And he still controls Saxony with its treasury that ultimately did fund almost 25% of his war chest. But yeah, coming in now, Frederick is having 60,000 Prussian troops, but with the Russian core, he is able to bolster his numbers. And I think Simon, maybe you'd like to take us through this battle.
Now, the thing with the Russian core is that at this point, Peter had already been deposed and Catherine took over, and she orders the troops to return to Russia. But Frederick relies on a very old tactic that I think we talked a lot about in our first episode, which is good old bribery. He just bribes the Russian general into staying long enough, not to fight for him, but just staying there so the Austrian thinks that he has more troops. And as you can see, to the north here, the greens are the Russian troops, which are pretty much decorative. Now, Frederick essentially places his army, as you can see, and
I'm just going to just add, the Russian commander was called Zakhar Chernyshev, and he was going to be one of the 10 military commanders relieved by. Sorry, he was actually going to be playing a role in the reformation of the Russian armies, but would never. This would be his last command in the field ever in his career.
Yeah, so as we can see, Dawn here is to the south, and they both form these semicircles surrounding each other. And Frederick starts out to the on the western side with his troops, but slowly moves more and more troops to the right. Now, thanks to the Russians, the Austrians are still forced to deploy major forces to their left flank to prevent a attack there, or fearing an attack on that side. While the Prussians themselves can focus their pretty much most of their strength to their left flanks, so facing the Austrians' right.
Yeah, and I think in this battle, for a change, Frederick actually outnumbered the Austrians. Though the margin isn't really that great, it's with his Russian allies who contribute approximately, maybe slightly under 45% of the troops. Frederick is deploying about 23,000 men, whereas Dawn has about 20,000. And you also got to consider everybody is war weary by now. Like even the veteran soldiers, even the generals. So there was not really much fancy maneuvering for this battle.
And we also have to keep in mind that for this battle, the Austrians tried to fortify their position as much as possible to make the advances as difficult as possible.
Yeah, but it did not work, and it was a pretty convincing Prussian victory.
Yeah, pretty much the Prussian attacked as I mentioned, the right flank of the Austrians, actually managing to outflank the flank and push it inwards, and in this way managed to defeat the Austrians, forcing them to retreat out of Silesia, pretty much securing this area. While they wouldn't, I will say that for the future, recapture the fortresses that were taken by the Austrians, due to the losses gained and their financial problems, wouldn't be able to form another army to try again to attack. But this will actually not be the last battle of the war, because there will be another one fought in the place that the entire war began, which is Saxony.
But before we do that, Greg, I remember I had asked you if you could speak about a certain individual, because he is going to be the man who leads a pretty successful attack that wins this battle. So would you like to talk about Prince Henry?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I think he was born Friedrich Wilhelm, but Prince Henry of Prussia. He was the elder brother of Frederick the Great, and he would be one of his most trusted professional generals. Early in his career, he embodied the requirements of a disciplined, Scharnhorst-like officer before those ideas even existed. He was rigorous with his drills, he was very efficient with his staff work, and he was known to be quite calm and methodical in his approach to war.
Well, he had to be a soldier, right? Because his father was a soldier king.
Exactly. His reputation rested on steady leadership, reliability under pressure, and a keen sense of battlefield logistics. As you were both speaking of quite early on in the series, during the War of the Austrian Succession, he fought alongside Frederick, and he played quite a crucial role in expanding Prussia's strategic footprint. Commanded corps and detachments in key theaters, contributing to Prussia's hard-won gains in Bohemia and Silesia. His 1745 victory at Hohenfriedberg was quite a notable achievement.
Oh,
thank you.
Sorry, somebody came in my room.
Oh, no problem. With the outbreak of the 7 Years' War, he remained one of Frederick's principal generals and a stabilizing strategic figure for the Prussian lowlands. He would direct substantial portions of the field armies, especially in the northern and central theaters, coordinating multiple sieges, maneuver campaigns, defensive operations, as the previous coalitions of Austria, Russia, France, and Sweden, they were pressing upon the Prussians on multiple fronts. While Frederick led several major campaigns personally, Henry's command presence ensured that Prussia could sustain a long multi-front war. And he was quite prized for his organizational skills, securing supply lines, executing operational depots, and maintaining cohesion within the army's ranks. So I guess in a lot of ways you could see him as kind of the glue that held a lot of the military together.
True, and I think just because of this, I would like to take over, and
Mhm.
we want to talk about the Battle of Freiburg. As Simon mentioned, the theater of what do you call it? The Silesian theater has closed out. Frederick has won with the help of the Russians and good old bribery. The Austrians are too broke to recapture it, but they the Prussians still occupy Saxony, which is obviously coveted by which is the place where the entire war started because that's where the first battles and everything took place. Now, how right now the army is also going to be reinforced with a lot of what do you call Saxons as well because the Austrians just don't have enough manpower to even have like a full army here. But they do with the Saxons helps because only despite occupying the entire province, the biggest advantage that the Saxons have is the capital city of Dresden had never fallen. That still remained in Saxon hands. So that's where they were able to mount the defense. So during the in the build up to the battle of Freiburg, you had the Prince of Stolberg and the gen who was you know later part of the House of Stolberg. He commanded the Saxon Austrian forces around the city of Freiburg and was expecting an Austrian army led by Andreas Hadek from coming over. Hadek is famous as a cavalry general who made that raid on Berlin and held it for ransom with 3,000 cavalrymen. Now, initially, the Prince of Stolberg has the command of the city of Freiburg and its fortifications. And as you can see here, right, around Brand and this position, he has created strong fortifications and entrenchments, which are not going to be easily sorry, uh, assaulted. And not visible on the map, there are about 8,000 other Austrian soldiers as well. Prince Henry was initially north of Freiburg, and he actually was planning to move to the north to link up with another Prussian general that was there. That Prussian general, Hayes, had about 10,000 ish soldiers. And in the build up to the battle, which takes place in October of 1762, like towards the end of 29th October 1762, in the few days before the battle, both both armies get the notifications that they are going to be reinforced. Prince Henry is told that his older brother, Frederick the Great, is dispatching 20 infantry squadrons to reinforce his army. Whereas the Prince of Stolberg is told, like, a similar sized force of Austrians plus General Haddock's cavalry forces are going to come and reinforce him. However, Henry gets word of Haddock's and the other Austrian arrivals and decides to make a bold gambit and attack. And he's not even coordinated with the other Prussian general as well, I might add. He takes the initiative on his own. But he does have one great one great asset. General Seidlich is his one of the generals serving with him, who is, as we've discussed in the previous episodes, one of the great cavalry generals of the war. Now, Prince Henry, during his reconnaissance, observed the Austrian positions, and while he noted that there was a lot of strong defenses, This particular region, where between the city of Brand and their main fortifications here, was exposed and undefended. That is where he intended to make his main thrust. But in order to do so, he needed his right flank and center, which was to be led by two commanders. They had to, keep the Austrian forces occupied so that they do not redirect reinforcements. Basically, do a better job than for him than the Princess Ubisi did in against the Duke de Brogal. So, in the start of the morning, on the 29th, you had the central and right columns of the Austrian armies, move forward to attack, and both columns are led by two brothers of the Stutterheim family. They make a very bloody attack. They storm and successfully take the outer bastions of the Austrian and Saxon forces, and so they have some success in the center. The right flank, it is initially shattered by the Prussian advance, sorry, by the Austrian defenses. And the Prince of Stornberg himself comes, but crucially has redeployed with a lot of the reserves. So the Sturmheim brothers do summon their own reinforcements so that they can pin down the Austrians at this part, because this is a key part of the tenet of the plan. And at the same time, the other Prussian general that I mentioned, who had a camp to the north, he got wind of what the prince is doing, and General Holzen does try to move across the river here to try to be in position to intercept the Austrian and Saxons as they retreat. With Austrian attention now focused at the center and the right of the Prussians, General Seidlitz leads the main force with Prince General Kleist as well and Prince Henry. They move in successfully, mostly making it into this area between the Austrian lines and start redeploying. It is only then that the Austrians realize the gravity of the situation. Prince Henry makes a decision, and a bulk of the forces wheeled and face towards the north, so that we have them facing the full might of the Austrian and Saxon armies as some reinforcements come from Freiburg, and the reinforcements that the Prince of Solberg took are redeployed across the entire field of battle. General Seidlitz and Prince Henry leave a very small force with a good amount of artillery to kind of bombard the positions of this Austrian fortress here and at the city of Brand, which means the Austrian forces that are there do not come to reinforce the Austrian defenses around the city of Freiburg itself. It's a grueling battle. It's a big back and forth. But by 10 a.m., the Prussians under Prince Henry do take the advantage and start pushing back the Austrians. And that's when the Prince of Stoltenberg just starts evacuating Freiburg and manages to withdraw in good order, because he manages to get his forces across the river quickly. General Holzen, who had already crossed and was in ambush, did not pursue them, since another Austrian cavalry force of 8,000 that I mentioned was already watching his forces, so his own flanks were threatened by a similar sized army. But at the end of the Battle of Freiburg, the 22,000 of Prince Henry of Prussia suffered 2,500 casualties, whereas the Prince of Stolberg's Austrian Saxon army lost 8,000 men on their 30,000 strong army. And this was the last battle of the war. So the 7-year war is finally over. And it was a pretty brutal war, as I think anyone could imagine. And if we were to consider the casualties in losses, it's estimated Prussia lost over 180,000 soldiers throughout the war. Britain lost almost 160,000 as well. Portugal are almost 10,000. On the other side, the French lost over 200,000 men. The Austrians, similar number to the Prussians. The Russians had 120,000 dead only. I know I'm using the term only, but the biggest success of the Russians in this entire war was they were never categorically defeated outright. They did not suffer any major loss, unlike any of the other powers, which is actually to their credit, you could say.
But to be fair, they were never really the focus of Frederick and
True
his
enough, but
main army.
it's
We have to admit that, but still very impressive.
I'm completely with you. They were supposed to kind of be a support to the Austrians in the grand scheme of the war, because Austria was the one that harbored the deepest grievances. And in the aftermath, you do have the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Hubertusburg. So the Treaty of Hubertusburg was signed between Prussia, the Austrians, and Saxony. And this this treaty in particular just returned the lands to the status quo before the war. But see, if you really consider it, it's a victory for Prussia in the sense that they kept Silesia, which was ultimately what Austria demanded for its honor to get back.
And we also have to keep in mind that thanks to this, the Prussians moved up immensely in power and reputation. They started this. They started this entire war out as a regional power with somewhat some modicum of influence, and ended it as one of the major powers that had a reputation for extreme martial prowess.
And there was concurrently another treaty, which is the Treaty of Paris in 1763, signed between France, Britain, Spain, and Portugal, which saw a lot of exchange of territories in the New World, you could say. The key thing being the loss of Canada to the British, but the French gave that up so that the Spanish gained more for the Louisiana treaties area, and the French would keep their Caribbean trade, which is what they wanted primarily. The French were allowed in India, for example, to retain and keep all the trading ports that they lost, like which is like Pondicherry and all, on the condition that they could never be fortified again. And France lost its influence in the US, which was a major loss with loss of fishing and everything. And some people in the British government, especially William Pitt the Elder, was actually pretty pissed off with this treaty. He felt they could have gone way more harsh on the French. But as Simon correctly mentioned, the Prussians were the true victors in terms of the reputational boost that they got, because their army was utterly destroyed in this war. That in the War of Bavarian Succession that takes place, even though Frederick leads his armies, the Prussians perform really shit. Now, Frederick markets himself very well. His personal reputation went up, and he's seen as the guy that won the war, conveniently ignoring that the British bankrolled a good chunk of your war effort and also helped keep your flanks safe.
I mean, in the modern Germany, he's seen as one of the key people in German history, or the German unification, right up there with people like Bismarck himself, or funnily Napoleon is also seen as one of the main people that caused the foundation of the German nation.
Well, to be fair, he did
He
cause the
did.
dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, right?
Well, it's more that everybody hated him so much that they decided, okay, let's form Germany to beat him up.
Well, well, to be fair, the greatest achievement of Napoleon was getting all of Europe to, like, drop in so many resources and ally together just to take him down. But just back to Frederick, he also conveniently forgets the second miracle of the House of Brandenburg. Sorry, House of Hohenzollern. He kind of just puts, Prussia at that pedestal. And despite this, as you mentioned, people from all the European powers, Britain, France, Austria, Russia, they do send representatives to study in the Prussian military academies to kind of learn the secrets of their power. And Prussia is definitely going to be a major power in Europe, though their army is really just going to be coasting on reputation till practically by 1810 when they start to remodel under General Scharnhorst.
I mean, when they were pretty much forced to completely change their army because Napoleon beat the shit out of them.
Yep. Like what? In 6 weeks, the entire Prussian army was practically killed or captured. Napoleonic blitzkrieg, but yeah, the Prussian army was just going to be coasting on reputation till you could say like maybe 1810 when General Scharnhorst and Gneisenau start to really put their reforms. But post that, the Prussians do try to put a greater emphasis on their officer training, which, as Simon and I have discussed many times in our private conversations, is pretty much like goes to the next level when General Helmut Moltke the Elder takes over, empowering the junior officers. And Russia is also a big, you could say, a winner of the war in terms of reputation, because Russia was also a very poor nation in the build up to the 7 Years' War. They were seen as weak and not up to scratch, but throughout the war they proved themselves capable of holding their own and actually beating the shit out of Frederick.
I mean,
Koenigsdorf being the biggest example.
I mean, they ended the war as the youngest of the great powers. And now they were only the second youngest of the great powers in Europe.
So you have them, but they kind of like become a bit decandent. But yes, they were the greatest victors, and they also eliminated like the French influence in Poland, at least for now. And this is actually where I would say that, and I'll just get to Austria first. Austria starts its terminal decline as a power. I would say that like they do have a bit of a resurgence at the end of the War of the Sixth Coalition, but that's just kind of because the Russians and British and pretty much everyone in the world has united against Napoleon. But Austria is losing its influence because Saxony is was not protected. Frederick took over Silesia, and so it's literally they got beaten by one of their elector states.
And
this actually also means Bavaria, which has always been like one that elector state which had a lot of attitude, they start pushing for their own reforms and such, to the point that they actually become a kingdom in the future.
And we also have to keep in mind that a lot of the Austrians' power in the past has actually come from convincing the rest of Germany to support them, because as I often say, and I often tell in private conversations, and I think I also mentioned at the start, the Holy Roman Empire is very weak internally, but can be very strong externally when it gets its shit together. And especially in the wars against the Turks, we have seen against for the Austrians, they oftentimes really had help from the rest of Germany. And now for the first time...
Is it kind of like, for example, like when Prince Eugene in that great Turkish war, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Battle of Zenta, because the Imperial Diet and all the German states did contribute pretty heavily for the Austrian war effort.
Yeah, and now for the first time, really, since like the Middle Ages, there was a power strong enough to actually challenge the Austrians or put in different ideas to them in Germany and sort of challenge. So there's this somewhat big divide in Germany between the north and the south. And for the first time, there was a power strong enough to essentially champion the northern ideals of German culture, not just the southern one.
Yeah, and I think what also happened was these outcomes did force Frederick the Great to really, go to I call it like the second half of his reign, where he really focused on enhancing his kingdom through administration, farming, infrastructure development, and everything.
And
Because Prussia was absolutely devastated, like Saxony and Silesia.
and there's this really cool thing that he did, which was that a lot of these soldiers or the veterans were really educated, but they had were injured or unable to do like the work they did previously, which oftentimes was farming. So what the Prussian state did, it essentially gave them jobs in the schooling system, and they, thanks to this, they actually started very early in teaching children and actually the lower classes how to read and write.
Yeah, Frederick really focused on protecting his subjects, passing a lot of good laws for the people. He became the potato king and then he also had to encourage a lot of movement of people into Prussia. So it's they took a pretty brutal beating and loss of manpower. And I think the biggest loser amongst the Germanic states, 100% was Saxony and Poland. So Saxony at this time, its elector was also the king of Poland. He was able to do absolutely nothing for the entire war. Really impactful. And with Poland losing the Polish Lithuanian crown, losing a lot of influence, you actually would have Prussia, Austria, and Russia just between the 1770s till I think around the 1790s, when you had the final partitions of Poland, which completely wiped the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth off the map.
Yeah, and a story that is actually forgotten that also ruined Poland was that the Prussians managed to get a press for Polish coins, so they just flooded the Polish market with debased coins and counterfeit currency to finance their own
God.
war and just absolutely crippled the Polish economy.
Damn. Okay, that I never knew.
That is sneaky. That's good.
I'm not sure the Poles might appreciate that, Greg.
Ouch.
Yeah, and then I think now we just quickly get back to the other two major powers, because I'm not going to really talk about Spain, Portugal, and Sweden because, well, in the grand scheme of the war, no one just gives a damn. All three are waning powers, just trying to stay relevant. Like, as Simon said, Sweden just literally came onto the war in an opportunistic sense. It never made a serious effort.
At least they were invited to the war. The Ottomans just sat out. Pretty pathetic.
They're the old man of Europe, man.
I mean,
Yeah.
Gotta give them some.
This was one of a chance where they maybe actually could have taken some stuff.
Yeah.
Especially if I'm not mistaken, they literally lost the kingdom of Hungary to the Austrians, like what, 50, 60 years ago?
Yeah, and we also have to keep in mind that the Ottomans would actually use a lot of the territory to the Russians soon after in the wars that Catherine the Great would start.
Oh, missed opportunity. Britain, in the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, became the preeminent global power now. They controlled the trade in North America with the treaties. They had no problem letting the French keep their sugar trade because their own Indies sugar trade was secured. They gained a lot of prominence and power in India, But I think the biggest loss was obviously that they're going to be losing the American colonies in a couple of decades.
Certainly a turning point.
Yeah, the French, they also suffered because of economic hardship, uh, and because they backed. Ultimately, from a PR perspective, you backed the losing side pretty badly. The Royal Navy really crippled and destroyed the French Navy, and it was really a very aggressive and very ambitious rebuilding program that the French undertook over the next 15-20 years to actually get the Navy up to a comparable size. Not as big as the Royal Navy, but enough that the British know that, okay, the rebuilt French fleet is going to be a threat. Because I think by the time of the Revolutionary Wars, the French fleet is having maybe 50 to 55 ships of the lines, which back then it's like kind of just having the battleships, right? But yeah, this is the war that takes place, the World War Zero. The funny thing is the alliances that were made quickly fracture within a few years after the war is over.
Of course.
But they're all going to unite again one day against one country.
I can't guess
So,
who.
Yeah, vive the emperor.
A tiny man
But,
with a big
yeah,
horse.
God fights on the side with the greatest artillery.
Thank you both for traversing what is almost the longest one we've ever done. I think the North African campaign still is the champion at like 14 hours or something. But this has
Well, to
been
be fair,
quite
we had
extensive.
10 episodes there.
Yeah. And for the audience who's listening to our simultaneous Taiping Rebellion series, yeah, I'm going to make sure it's not 12 episodes long. It's going to be cut short. It would be way too long. Thank you both for going through all of this. This certainly was World War Zero, as it did encompass a large part of the globes. We didn't talk about, there's battles in Manila, for example. I mean, there was all sorts of battles all over the place in the colonial possessions.
True,
It was
but those are
all-encompassing.
very. I know I did deliberately skip over those,
Yeah,
just because they were just really tiny in comparison. Because barring North America and India, the action was still really new.
Yeah, it was practically a raid of Manila, and then you have the Caribbean island battles and such. But in the grand scheme of things, these were just little tokens on the negotiating table at the end. I want to remind everyone who isn't checking us out on YouTube or on Spotify, for that matter, put a lot of effort into putting up a lot of maps and portraits to try and really give this more of a visual feeling to show off the geography. Certainly, for those of you watching the Taiping Rebellion episodes, you have to you see some of the maps because it is very difficult to go through the geography of China. Before I let you go, I just want to remind everybody, if you'd like to further support the channel, consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account. Either gets you access to the exclusive podcast series. Episode 36 will be coming along soon. I'm going to be putting up a poll to see what people want to hear more about. It's definitely not limited to just the Pacific War. I cover any type of history I can, and sometimes I dabble into fantasy or sci-fi. You're going to get a lot of early access to some of the stuff I'm cooking up with my animator, and he's about to give me a lot of content involving the Battle of Beiping and Tianjin. So that's the opening of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And you get voting rights for the subjects I'll tackle next. Stating all that, big thanks to our guest Simon for joining us on this journey, and we hope to see you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It was really fun to do this, and feel free to invite me at any time. Yeah, as I said, it's been a lot of fun.
All right. Till next time.
I think I'm just gonna say we're gonna have him for the Napoleonic series just because he hates that era of history.
Well, I do not hate the era. I have certain grievances against certain people.
I don't know what he's alluding to. As far as I know, Napoleon was very nice to the Germanic people. Very nice. Well, until next time. Woo.